Okay, so I think I'll be alright without the microphone, but just let me know if not. When I first came up with the proposal for what I wanted to speak about today, I think I was far too ambitious, wanting to try and capture, as the headline suggests here, the title of the presentation, almost about capturing sort of the whole spirit of the United States as a whole by looking at sports journalism across the United States as a whole. But really, what this piece has now boiled down to is me focusing exclusively, not only exclusively on Tom Wolfe, but a particular article that Tom Wolfe wrote for Esquire magazine, focusing on stock car racing. So a bit of a niche area of sports writing, but I think what I hope to explore in the next few minutes is about how this writing of Wolfe's in the context of motorsport says a lot about Wolfe's style more generally in his work across both novels and other types of literary journalism. So, yeah, as I say here, I'm focusing on a piece by Wolfe. On the face of it, it reads like a piece, some of you might have read it, it's called The Last American Hero is Junior Johnson, Yes. On the face of it, and based on that headline, it sounds like it's going to be a profile of a particular individual, of a particular sports person. But I would argue, whilst on the face of it, it is that profile, it's also something deeper. I think Johnson, in the way that Wolfe writes about him, becomes emblematic of a certain type of Americanness itself, and embodies, the driver, Johnson, embodies a certain type of way of living in the New South in the States. So really, whilst the piece appears to be a profile of an individual, it's saying far more about national culture, and in particular the South in the United States. And we all know that, most of us know, when we read Tom Wolfe, whether it's the novels or the literary journalism, sometimes it's what I call the pyrotechnics. Wolfe once said that in the New Journalism, his manifesto of his writing, that one of the things he tried to do is use any literary device that would mean that the reader stuck around. He wanted to make people stick around and read his writing, and that's a pretty good premise, I think, for any writer to adopt, to sort of think about how they retain, obviously, that reader's interest. And I think his writing about stock car racing enables him to give kind of free rein to that spirit. Stock car racing, it's that, you smell the petrol, it's exuberant, it's dramatic, it's noisy. It's almost a sporting embodiment of Wolfe's writing style. So I think what we see in this piece is Wolfe at ease writing about that subject, because it sort of mirrors his own natural, flamboyant, energetic, high-octane style of writing. And as I say, there's a kind of harmony of form and content. I'm also going to, I'm not sure if Friedrich Nietzsche ever thought that his writings would be applied to stock car racing, but I'm going to try and bring in a bit of a theoretical framework there. And if I've got time, I'm also going to talk about the idea of the hero, or maybe even the godlike Peter in the context of sports writing. So, in The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche articulated, as a way of trying to capture the beauty as he saw it, of Wagner's music and also ancient Greek tragedy, he invoked this concept of Apollonian aesthetic experience, or artistic output, versus the Dionysian. The Apollonian is focused on reason, on a clear light, sort of individual application of reason, and it has a very rational feel to it, and a kind of measured, ordered beauty. Whereas the Dionysian is more focused on the rapturous, and maybe also the context of a communion of different people feeling that sense of beauty collectively. And there's the element of the ecstatic associated with it. And my argument here is that what we have in Wolfe's writing about stock car racing is the Dionysian. Him trying to capture this sense of collective ecstasy and excitement through not only the sport, but through writing about that sport. So here's his opening paragraph, which I could read it aloud, but the point here is that immediately it's like, if I'm allowed to use a motor car analogy, rather than starting off in first gear and steadily going through the gears, immediately we have Wolfe, making people stick around by sort of grabbing hold of them and hitting them with this exuberant style. Hints of rhyme in there. Aqua malaka, malaka laka. It's a kind of full-on, as I say, I would say Dionysian approach. This rapturous start to the writing immediately. And there are trademarks. Those who've read a fair bit of Tom Wolfe will know, that he has this exuberant approach to punctuation sometimes, to sentence and paragraph structure. And there are these various devices that pop up along the way that, as I say, I think conveys the excitement and the drama of the speedway track itself and the personalities involved in it. And as I say here, I think in this sports writing that we see from Wolfe, and it's very much the kind of wake the dead prose, as somebody once called it, this heavily energetic, arresting type of writing that commands attention. Now, I've got a couple of provocative statements, questions that I throw in the course of this presentation. There's one there. Do we regard Wolfe as a master stylist, or is he the sort of arch literary narcissist, indulging himself, writing for himself rather than anybody else? It's this kind of idea of almost forgetting about the reader and just kind of writing for his pure pleasure of himself. And I think whichever side you fall on in that debate, and I know that for some people, Wolfe is a bit over the top, it's maybe a bit too much as a writer, almost trying too hard. I think we can agree, as Matthew Ricketson has said there, that there's still there's a distinctive voice that Wolfe possesses. When you're reading Tom Wolfe, and that, I'm a sports writer myself, and that's kind of one of the ambitions you want to have as a writer, that somebody can read your opening paragraph and kind of sense the hand behind it immediately. That's, I think, an aspiration for many, many writers. And I think I've already touched on this sort of element of rhyme and rhythm, almost poetic, that Wolfe brings in right from the intro of this piece. And I think in some senses, whilst it's not a poem, it does have a kind of poetic sense, in that I think that this particular essay, this particular article by Wolfe, kind of embodies this idea that Samuel Taylor Coleridge discussed when he was thinking about poetry, about how the sound of the words should in some sense reflect the sense of the words as well, and I think we see that in this piece. But also, whilst it's kind of enthusiastically Dionysian, to go back to the Nietzschean framework, what we have with Wolfe doing here in this very long article is him capturing, through words, he's kind of immortalising, memorialising a very specific moment, a sense of place. The theme of the conference, he's capturing that sense of place and that moment on a Sunday at a particular stock car event. Now, interestingly, we all when we read Tom Wolfe, we're familiar with some of the sort of nervous energy that fizzes through the pieces. But I think actually it was when he was a kid that he first wrote about stock car racing, and again, Matthew Ricketson's done some archival research here. Interesting that already when he was still at high school, you can see there in some of the little bits of writing about motor racing that already we can see the proto-Wolfe emerging, using these kind of phrases: revered calorific drivers, sulphurous zeal. These very kind of high energy phrases, which maybe, as I say, give us a little taste of what was to come in his writings as an adult. And also, just giving this talk a bit of a historical sweep, William Hazlitt, who's a UK, an English writer in the early 19th century, he wrote what's often regarded as, certainly sort of in the Western canon, if I can use that phrase, one of the earliest forms of literary sports journalism. He wrote a long piece called The Fight, which was a description of a bare-knuckle prize fight taking place in England in the early 19th century. And in that piece, The Fight, Hazlitt describes all these people, you know, moving out of London to the home counties to go to descend on this particular location where the fight is going to take place. And I think what we read, whether Wolfe was aware of Hazlitt's writing or not, I don't know, but what I think we have in the way that Wolfe describes sort of the descent on the speedway track and the coming together of community in his piece that I'm talking about today, that for me has this echoes of the way Hazlitt wrote about community coming together for the fight. As I say there as well, also stock car racing for me in this piece becomes a way of conveying kind of excitement about the future for the American South too. Wolfe has this kind of, without explicitly stating it, he kind of suggests that the kind of motor car and its kind of wider the wider access to the automobile in the population kind of sort of heralds a kind of new future that America can race towards. Okay, so yeah, just a few thoughts here. You know, I think a lot of sports writing falls back on this concept of the heroic, or framing an analysis of individuals under the kind of category of the hero or anti-hero. And I think what I'd like to say is that you know, in a way, it reflects a kind of human desire to find and locate heroes, maybe even you know gods, as kind of Peter was alluding to. And I think what we need to be wary of when we're kind of writing as sports writers today, or reading people's sports writing, is the extent to which, you know, the concept of the hero is used, you know, with any justification, with any subtlety, or whether it just becomes a kind of lazy motif or lazy way of framing an individual that sports writers can fall back on. I think actually Wolfe uses the hero here when talking about Johnson in a more subtle way. He's talking about the stock car racer as an embodiment of the American South. But I think it's a word of warning that sometimes, you know, when we talk about the hero in sports writing, we can tip into the adulatory and the hagiographic very easily. We need to be wary of that. And I think that's it from me, other than to say, in the course of preparing for this, I came across we can discuss this maybe during the questions, I came across this little, what I regard as quite a provocative statement, effectively saying that if you want to find some decent high culture sports writing, then you're only going to find it in the United States. You can forget about the rest of the world. That's my emphasis at the end there. But maybe we can touch on that with our Q&A. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you very much. Got all kinds of Bruce Springsteen lyrics going through my head right now. That heroic. I'm just realizing too, I think I didn't put the proper card up for you, Tom. Sorry about that.
Oh, I can handle that.
But I'll make sure I've got one for Kevin. So
you can put Tom up.
Sure. There we go. So we have Kevin Lerner talking to us about gay Talese and sports writing.
My talk today is part of notes for a larger project I'm working on, which is a sort of intertwined biography of Gay Talese, David Halberstam, and Tony Lucas, two of whom are very well known as writers. Tony Lucas probably a little bit less known, but also a Pulitzer Prize winner. And today I'm looking at Gay Talese, and I think it's appropriate that this comes after a talk on Tom Wolfe. Sports are very important for understanding the work of Gay Talese for several reasons. One, probably his second most famous story was about sport. His most famous probably being Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, which Esquire magazine called the greatest piece that it had ever published. But Silent Season of a Hero, the Joe DiMaggio profile that Tom just mentioned, is probably the second ranked piece in the Gay Talese pantheon. David Halberstam, in an anthology that he edited, called Silent Season the best piece of American sports writing in the 20th century. And I think that's probably true. Another reason that sport is important for understanding Talese is that he wrote the story that Tom Wolfe credited as being the first example of new journalism. A breakthrough story in Esquire in 1962 profile of the boxer Joe Louis, called Joe Louis, the King is a Middle-Aged Man. And Talese kept coming back to sports more than any other topic throughout his entire career, and especially to the boxer Floyd Patterson. But I think more than anything in understanding Gay Talese in sports is that Talese has said on multiple occasions that the reason he became a writer was because he couldn't be an athlete. And being a writer about athletes was as close as he could come to having that aura of the athlete around him. And this was a feeling he had as early as high school in Ocean City, New Jersey, where he knew he wasn't going to make the team, but he wanted to have some of that same aura of athletes. But the thing is, when it came to sports, and in some ways this is my thesis, Talese was interested in writing about everything around sports, much more than he was interested in actually writing about the game itself. It was the people who interested him, the athletes, and the people tangential to the game. So people like the dentist who makes boxing mouthpieces and is worried more about the safety of the mouthpiece than he is about the safety of the boxer. The horseshoer who replaces the horseshoes before each game. The caddy in a golf match. Managers. Customato, who is Floyd Patterson's trainer in boxing. And even the fans. He spent an entire story about a baseball game sitting in the stands talking about the fans. And also all of the time that surrounds the game. Right? Not the match itself, not the important one, but the scrimmage, the practice, the locker room after the game, the train moving athletes from one place to another, and the long retirement of a boxer or a baseball player. And I think this approach universalizes his stories. In fact, I'm actually probably alone on this panel as not really being much of a sports fan. And you can shame me if you like in the Q&A afterwards. The only sport I can really summon much passion for is baseball, and especially Talese's beloved New York Yankees. And I do come to that naturally, having Italian-American, northern New Jersey roots. But I'm not a diehard when it comes to sports. So for me, the love of Gay Talese's sports writing is because he's so interested in people and because of the stories that he's telling. So some of the earliest sports writing that we have from Gay Talese is from the University of Alabama, where he attended university. He got there sort of by accident. He actually failed to get into any of the northeastern universities that he applied to, and it was only through the generosity of one of his father's clients as a tailor that he was able to get into the University of Alabama. The myth is that Talese did not even know that an application had been submitted on his behalf. I don't know that I entirely believe that, but he has said that on his own in his memoirs. So he talks in 1952 when he was at the University of Alabama writing for the Crimson White, the student newspaper there. He would talk about Alabama players dressed in shorts or in towels or in nothing, talk with some understandable bitterness and great disappointment about the game, describing these players standing in the locker room after they had lost the game. Another 1952 story, he says, 48 players boarded the planes at the Atlanta airport and flew back to Tuscaloosa quietly, thinking about all the ifs involved in this 1952 Bama Tech battle. If Marlowe had scored, if Dick Pretz had been stopped from scoring for Tech, if Hobson's last pass on the 5-yard line was complete, if the Bama 15-yard penalty had not been, if. They'll be talking ifs all week. But it was a hell of a ball game that Saturday in sunny Atlanta. And that's as close as he gets to describing what happened in the actual game. There's nothing about plays, who scored when, just the players talking about what had gone wrong. A year later, still writing for the Crimson White in Alabama, he writes about hail and cold wind, a 30-degree temperature Saturday afternoon. Coach Harold, Red Drew, gently tooted the whistle at 3:30 p.m., and 80 huge hunks of Alabama football scholarships began to smash and lash at one another. So he describes them not even as human beings, but as scholarships at the first scrimmage of the season. So even at this point in his career, you can see some of the playfulness that he's bringing to the way that he's writing about sports. Talese has said, in fact, that he wanted to write short stories, and that most of his inspiration came from fiction when it came to writing about sports. He never believed that anything he was doing was all that new, and this is one point with which I tend to agree with Gay Talese. Calling the new journalism new is an incredible misnomer. The work that gets done in the 1960s and the new journalism movement is really part of a tradition that goes back much longer, and Talese seemed to recognize that and sort of disclaimed the fact that he was an inventor of new journalism, even though he was called such by Tom Wolfe. After he left the Army, he had a stint in the Army in the 1950s, he took on a job at the New York Times on the sports desk, which was his first writing job. And when he was working there, he covered sports in many different ways. My favorite, I think, is a piece he wrote about an NYU baseball game. And for those who are from the US, you'll know that NYU is not a school that is known today for its sports. It also was not in 1958. This is the piece that Talese spends the entire game in the stands describing the fans. The only real mention of any action on the field comes in relation to one of the fans who was there to watch a boy she had a crush on. That's the only time we actually hear anything that happened. So he opens with a description of the lack of turnout at this game. The lead goes like this. NYU has 31,068 students and is the third largest university in the nation. But only 18 fans showed up for the game. Only one sat through it, and he was not a student. He was a Consolidated Edison engineer, that's the power company in New York, a Consolidated Edison engineer named Joe Fernandez, who does not particularly like baseball or even NYU. Fernandez quit work early yesterday to watch his nephew, Tony Diaz, a catcher. But Diaz did not get into the ball game. And then Talese talks about a couple other fans who he's clearly interviewing. If there were only 18 of them, it wouldn't have taken him that long over the course of a baseball game. And he gets to Gloria. So Gloria, a hazel-eyed brunette of 19, was there to watch Dick Riley, NYU's third baseman, whom she met 5 months ago in Sociology 1, a required course. Like everybody else, Gloria shivered in the 40-degree temperature, and by the 7th inning, after Riley had doubled to right, scoring 2 runners, Gloria was gone. Now, we don't hear much from Gloria for several more paragraphs. There are 3 or 4 more paragraphs about other fans. But she comes back in the kicker of the piece, where Talese says, the score remained unchanged until Riley's double in the 7th scored 2 more and sent Gloria home. Which is a little bit of a pun if you know baseball, of course. Sending runners home means they have scored. In this case, it just sent Gloria home because she had seen what she needed from Tom Riley. In 1958, he does an experimental piece about boxing called Portrait of a Prize Fighter. The interesting thing in this piece is he actually does not mention the name of that prize fighter until the last paragraph. You don't know who he's talking about. This fighter is just called the prize fighter. Instead, he's presented as an archetype rather than an actual human being. So, 1958 is when he talks about the horseshoer and the fight dentist, which opens with another great lead. Whenever Dr. Walter H. Jacobs sees a fighter get banged on the mouth, hit in the teeth, or butted on the gums, he immediately begins to worry. M dash. Not about the fighter, but about the fighter's mouthpiece, which is a great lead. He does a profile of Roger Maris for the Times, a long profile of Roger Maris. But Roger Maris, who's a New York Yankees player, was seen not through the eyes of baseball, but through the eyes of endorsement deals. This is a story about early days of endorsements. I mentioned Floyd Patterson, who's one of the topics that Talese returned to over and over again. In the course of his career, Gay Talese wrote 37 articles about the boxer Floyd Patterson. And to write about one subject that many times is clearly verging on obsessive. The piece that Tom Wolfe called the first work of new journalism was a 1962 Esquire piece called Joe Louis, The King is a Middle-Aged Man. And what Wolfe pointed out as making it new was that this story opened with a scene rather than a lead, that there was something cinematic about it. And it's Joe Louis and his wife meeting at an airport after Louis had been in New York. And it opens with mostly dialogue. It starts off with a quote. "Hi, sweetheart," Joe Louis called to his wife, spotting her waiting for him at the Los Angeles airport. She smiled, walked toward him, and was about to stretch up on her toes and kiss him, but suddenly stopped. "Joe," she said, "where's your tie?" "Aw, sweetie," he said, shrugging. "I stayed out all night in New York and didn't have time." "All night," she cut in. "When you're out here, all you do is sleep, sleep, sleep." "Sweetie," Joe Louis said with a tired grin, "I'm an old man." "Yes," she agreed, "but when you go to New York, you try to be young again." They walked slowly through the airport lobby toward their car, being followed by a red cab with Joe's luggage. And that cinematic approach continues through most of Talese's Esquire writing. And I won't go into Silent Season of a Hero too much, except to say that the cinematic opening of Silent Season is one of my favorites, as it's not really a story. I'll disagree with Tom a little bit on this. I don't know that this is a story necessarily about a hero. I think it's a story about somebody who was a hero. But now he is, in the literal sense, a loser. He's become somebody who has lost something. I think it's a story about loss and regret. So that cinematic opening starts with Sicilian-American fishermen at San Francisco's Fisherman's Wharf, pans upward toward a blonde who is supposed to represent Marilyn Monroe, his ex-wife, and then eventually looks up toward the restaurant that DiMaggio now owns, where he looks down at this scene. And you can see the regret through that series of images. But I'll close by talking about Talese's 2006 memoir and how far he will go to write about people who are losers, people who have lost something. This memoir begins with Talese recounting a time he's sitting in his Upper East Side townhouse in New York City. His wife, Nan Talese, the publisher, is upstairs. She's probably more powerful than him in history, although this group would obviously look at Talese as sort of the star. But Nan Talese, big publishing powerhouse, she's busy. He's trying to entertain himself on an afternoon in New York by watching baseball on television. It's 1999. He's trying to flip back and forth between the New York Yankees, who he loves, and the New York Mets. The Yankees are in a long rain delay, so there's nothing for him to watch. The Mets game is out of reach. There's no reason to watch anymore. The score has become so separated he doesn't see any reason to watch. The only other thing he can find on television is the 1999 US versus China Women's World Cup soccer game, which he dismisses as being not worth watching because it is women. And there's a lot of casual sexism, the sexism of a man born in 1932 through this, and also some real racism in which he describes the American women not worth watching because they are too athletic, and the Chinese women not worth watching because they are too slim and boyish, and he sees no sexual attraction in them. But the game ends with a 0-0 draw and goes to penalty shots. And a Chinese woman athlete misses the only penalty shot, and so the US wins 5-4 in a 0-0 draw. But Talese becomes so fascinated with this woman who has lost the game for China that he literally, if we are to believe him, leaves without telling his wife, goes to the airport, and flies to China to track her down. And he is interested in seeing what does it mean to let down an entire country as an athlete. And that sort of focus on losers is what Talese was really most interested in. So I thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And to copy a metaphor from your paper, Jan has been waiting patiently on third base. He's ready to run for home, so he's going to take his own with his presentation. And again, Fairytale, Literary Sports Journalism, Rashka's Fairytale by Pavel. Jan, I'll hand it over to you here. Do you need the microphone?
I will put, I don't know, maybe. also wonder how many from you are familiar with Otto Pavel works? Okay, so no one. Are you okay because you are from here? Because yes, so I will be happy to introduce you his piece of work, because he's really, you know, I like him because he's weird, freaky. maybe you will find some gonzo factors in his work. Yes, he's weird from here, from Central Europe. Weird literary journalist from here. Okay, so you don't know him, so descriptive biography. Czech writer, journalist and sport reporter. He was born in Prague as the third and youngest son of a Jewish father, Leo Popper, who was a traveling salesman and a Czech Christian mother, which is quite important because yes, his father Leo was and his father taught Otto early to appreciate the outdoors, passing a love of sport and especially fishing, which is very important in his work. During World War, his father and both his older brothers were imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, and Otto remained with their mother, and all miraculously returned alive. He was an enthusiastic hockey player and played on the junior team of Sparta Praha, but his career was dashed by a serious illness and tonsillectomy. In 1949, he was engaged in sport reporter by Czechoslovak Radio, and he started his journalistic career. He visited, even he could visit, which was quite unusual, Western countries, even America. But in 1964, during Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, he showed signs of mental illness, and that's how it described this moment in How I Came to Know Fish. I went mad at the Winter Olympics in Innsbruck. My brain got cloudy, as if a fog from the Alps had enveloped it. And in that condition, I came face to face with one gentleman, the devil. He looked the part. He had hooves, fire horns, and northern teeth that looked hundreds of years old. With this figure in my mind, I climbed the hills above Innsbruck and torched a farm building. I was convinced that only a brilliant bonfire could burn off that fog. As I was leading the cows and horses from the barn, the Austrian police arrived. After retirement, in '96, you have a piece of his work. Actually, it's only one of two books which is translated to English. How I Came to Know Fish, autobiographical one. After retirement in 1966, he wrote his best works, like How I Came Now to Fish, and in '73, Otto Pavel died of sudden heart attack, and he was only 42. And as I said, he wrote plenty of works. The best works are when he was after retirement, but yes, only two, Golden Eels and How I Came to Know Fish. Unfortunately, only two are translated to English, so so you will have now a very precious moment, because I try to prepare with help with my sister, of course. Like always. I translate a very little, okay, because I have only 10 minutes to show you how weird, really literary journals he made in the Fairytale, Rashka's Fairytale. So I will follow Tom, who is native Slovak, not like me. He's not struggling with English like me, so I won't read it. Just you know, it's the first paragraph. It's the beginning. It's the beginning, you know. And when I read this paragraph, I was first time. I have probably two questions in my mind. What is this? And maybe what this is. So what this is. So because you know it's written like a fairy tale. Yes, you know. That's not once upon a time, but all poetic of the writing. Of course, I love his wonderful language, like this. Boosted in some way, and his very suggestive metaphors. You must be quite a magician to make a kid so half and half. So, yeah. And of course, you know, this part it doesn't work. So, okay. But it's helpful when you are nervous. But, okay, so yes. So Aldrich was a was father of the main hero of, I don't know, story of this fairy tale story. It's both in this weird but fantastic thing. Yes, so we have is Jirka. Jirka is usually Rashka. And probably, maybe only Joanna is. Have you read the? Okay, so okay, but it's another, you know. I really appreciate that we have such a great representation from South Africa. You know, yes, I think it's first conference, so yeah. So I think I have to explain you what he's doing, the guy. Skiing, but he's flying. Ski jumping. So this is national Polish sport. It is named. Why? Because it's tricky. I think that very few people are active sportsmen in active sports. Jump skiing. So it's Polish specialization. So we have really a lot of people. It's very popular in Poland. Probably most popular in the world. Maybe Germany are the second. We have Adam Małysz. Now we have Camosun, Kubacki, Żyła. Most of them are won Olympic medals and were world champion in ski jumping. Usually Rashka is the most popular. He even was chosen the best skier of the 20th century. Skier. I don't know if I will pronounce it, but you have it on the slide. So he won. He's a legend. He was a legend because he died in 2012. But he won in Olympic Games in Grenoble 2 medals, 1 gold and one silver. I think it's very important to explain you that 2 because there are 2 competitions, on large here and on medium here. Okay, so but the thing is that it's written like fairy tale, but it's about real person. So okay, so even if I found here kind of not so boosted words which is kind that describe specific of the sport. That he also saw he had to fight with mother aerodynamics and find the best ski and body position straight after the jump. Then he has to settle well in the air. I was really surprised when I read this. That's why I gave this paragraph, because I thought, okay, finally 2 normal phrases, finally 2 normal sentences. But when I read the second time, it's not normal, because again it's metaphor anthropomorphization. There is a mother aerodynamics, but there are 2. If you can, for me they differs very from others. So it's very shocking, because for me the whole story is very right in very, I don't know how to even but very boosted. Yeah, I love this language. Is this all kinds of this very suggestive metaphors. This example is, you can see that it's really written like fairy tale. Okay, so for example here, because he touched the clouds. It's kind of poetic language. So he's flying and he can touch clouds. So it's very. I think it's really this composition of literary journalism, the true story about true story about Rashka, and a fairy tale frame, fairy tale structure, fairy tale language even. This is very interesting. So for me, it's something really. I don't know. I very admire this language. I even came to the very well-known prop structures of Magic Tale, and I made this paste and
Copy paste.
Copy paste. Thank you. Copy paste the most widespread scientific method. So I will skip this. Yes, there are some of them exist, and for example, there is hero receives a magical agent object that has the quest. There's Aniczka Praweczkova, his aunt who lives in a little cottage on the mountain, of course, and there is a big old ash, and just before Grenoble Olympic Games, she asked him that you should not, buy atomic or some skis in the shop. You have to do your ski from this old rush. So okay, but the thing is that of course there is when he won, there is a great party, great fest in his town when he's coming back. So a lot of points from this prop are falsified in his story. But I think that this story wouldn't be impossible without Egon Erwin Kisz. I don't know how many, this name was mentioned. And he's one of the most, I don't know what, text is more safe. Himmelfahrt der Galgen Tony, Ascension to Heaven of Tony, the Gallow Girl. I probably only you again, you know the story, but okay, the thing is that Kisz makes the main structure of the story is trial of the main hero between the gates of heaven, and Kisz was socialist and communist. He was atheist. You read this, but I think it's very interesting because yes, so they use a lot of these fairy tales or non-true fact, non-true object, non-true actions and other things, but the reader reader knows that this is not true. So I think this is fair, and this is very. But in the reading, the strategy, it's something which is very immersive, very engaging reader. So the form is fantastic. So I have to. So once again, Rashka, and I have to end, and I would like to end with my favorite sentence from the book. Yes, they went there because, as we know, beer that is not drunk misses its destiny, and I think about this word, and that's the thing I'm going to do just after my conference will end, because I'm not only great admirer of writing of this weird, boosted, freaky work of Otto Pavel, but I'm also great admirer of Czech beer. Non-alcoholic, of course.
Thank you. Well, personally, I started off with an anecdote about hockey, and we ended on beer. I'm starting to feel really homesick for Canada. 4 very great presentations, thanks to all our presenters. We have lots of time for Q&A. I'm not sure if the microphone's working anymore. But I'll try to come around and distribute the microphone. And yeah, I'll also invite the presenters to come up and join the front table. And we have a question over here.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talks. Just one remark, the most famous work of Otto Pavel was actually translated into English, and I would highly recommend it to you. It's an autobiographical piece. It's called The Death of Beautiful Roebucks. Yes?
Yes, of course. The greatest novel.
Yes, it's an autobiographical novel about the father. About a mythic figure of the father. It's a poetic.
I don't know, sorry, how I could forget about it, so thank you.
Yeah,
yes.
And the father
wonderful
disappears in the concentration camp. and it's like Bruno Schulz with this style of poetic autobiography. Very, very, very moving, actually. I would recommend that highly. And I'd like to, I have a question to Tom and Kevin about the tradition of Jimmy Cannon as a sports writer, because I have read his columns. One is about Joe DiMaggio, actually, and you mentioned that Talese felt that he was walking in the footsteps of his predecessors, and I would suppose that Jimmy Cannon would be the obvious reference here. And I'm really interested about this heritage of Jimmy Cannon, because I heard he was a legend and that his sports writing is still referred to in America today. Is it true or is it not true? So, well, that would be my question. And another thing, just as more remarks, I really like Jan's idea of using the prop framework to Otta Pavel's Fairytale reportages. It's a very good point. Thank you very much.
Sure. So first, I'd say Jimmy Cannon is one of the names that is he's still very much part of the canon of sports writing in the United States and just of writing in the United States. And I'd say there's a tradition that sports writers often have to be the best writers because in many cases the outcome of the actual match is known, right? In baseball, for instance, there's something called box score, which is, it's just a list of numbers, but it tells you everything in a very small space what happened in the game. And so there's a tradition for the writers to have to recreate something in a way that is compelling and be storytellers as much as news reporters. Although I think Talese was more interested in the tradition of like F. Scott Fitzgerald as a short story writer. He was more interested in those stories that were stories, even than he was in sports. And like I said, I think he was interested in sports because the athletes got the girls, and he wanted to have some of that cachet that came with it.
Yeah, I mean, as an English sports writer, I'm aware of Jimmy Cannon's writing. You know, and I wonder whether it works the other way. You know, whether there are that many American sports writers who are familiar maybe with some of the names of UK sports writing, which takes me back to the final slide I had there. You know, the 20th century in the United States, as far as I've read it, and I won't have read as much, you know, as other people in this room, no doubt. But you know, there's some fantastic. I mean, David Halberstam, to an extent, I think, tries to, you know, at least one of his sort of compendiums of American journalism from the 20th century tries to sort of gather together a collection of sports writing, which to an extent tries to capture something of America in the 20th century. And there's so many great sports writers. You know, Jimmy Cannon was syndicated across so many titles and so widely read, he became something of a voice of the nation to an extent. And you know, I think, I just want to develop a point there that Kevin mentioned around writing around sport. You know, I'm a sports writer, I go to games and I like to cover games, but the real interest for me is that writing around sport and the personalities, the individuals involved. There's a really nice description that I try and apply in my own writing, and it came from a not particularly well-known British sports writer called David Foote. And David described about how when he was writing about sports and sports people, he tried to think about him occupying a space that was somewhere in between the psychiatrist's couch and the locker room. And I think that's a really good way to describe it. You know, we're writing about people, you know, faded heroes. And I agree that sometimes the heroic concept needs to be understood in a really broad sense of actually, you know, the great writers understand heroism and the anti-hero and fading heroic powers in a really interesting way and explore that in their writing as they kind of dissect these sporting personalities.
Jimmy Cannon created heroes by the very act of addressing them. You remember that you are Joe DiMaggio. You did that and that. So this is this rhetorical way of, you know, creating the persona.
So next one, a second, you know.
Yes, that's why I know. I'm not a big baseball fan,
but you are, yes. If I can comment to your comment, because I'm afraid that nobody else will, even link to my presentation. Yes, I wanted to know. I remember, I'm preparing something here about special. I'm not Polish literary journalists in Czech. Also, I try to check what is translated to English, and I think I haven't find it. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Yes,
so okay.
So I made better research, but the thing, the prop was very obvious, because yes, prop described just one universal model. So when I read in this story that this could probably didn't exist, or Anushka, or I don't remember the name, says to Jiří Rashka that you have to do your skill from this old wood. So of course I know that he, like every sport, try to have the best material, the best tool for ski jumping, which he could find there. So in this situation, it's really that he tries to implement the Fairytale model, which was quite well analyzed. Yes, this model was for me the most significant. So that's why I give you to us as an example.
If there's anyone else who has a question, I can bring the microphone.
My question is directed at Peter. Peter, I was drawn to the statistics that you shared about, towards the end of the presentation, the decline of sport magazines in terms of sales. And it got me thinking about the experience in South Africa, that currently the best-selling print publication is Soccer Laduma. And my question to you is, would you say that sport is the savior of print? And if so, is literary journalism the oxygen that we can depend on? And I like the analogies that Tom made here about writing around sport. And if you could comment on that in terms of the offering that publications like Soccer Laduma are giving to their readers. Thank you.
Well, I think that's very interesting. I take it you obviously know Soccer Laduma, and I think it's interesting that Soccer Laduma, their circulation has also dropped, but it is still the highest sold. But its sister publication, Kickoff, has closed down, and the style of writing between the two is very, very different. So it's in a way, I think Laduma is it's a weekly kind of nearly like a newspaper rather than a magazine. Yes. A South African newspaper for soccer or football. And they published, they were now published by the same stable that published a soccer magazine called Kickoff, and that closed. So the soccer magazines are closing, but the one that has a kind of a very popular appeal, and its writing, I would argue, is a very popular kind of writing. The style of interviews, they would say, "Oh, how are you doing, Tom, today?" That's how they would interview the players, and I think it has appeal to the masses. So no, unfortunately I wouldn't agree that literary journalism is the oxygen, because I think then we'd be all dying without oxygen. I think it's the mass appeal. Why that is, I find very difficult. I think it's just how generally print run and print newspapers are declining. But yes, I would agree that sport is really important, and I think sport is what keeps, they say sex and sport sells. Those two things.
Yeah, my other life, I'm a scholar in magazines, and I think that you put these circulation numbers up, and you see them in the context of the decline of magazine circulation in general. I know at least in the United States, there have been several efforts to have long-form sports journalism websites, essentially magazine-style websites. The best of these was probably one called Grantland, which is unfortunately no longer with us. But there's also The Ringer, to some extent, a site called The Athletic, which is now owned by the New York Times. That's not quite as devoted to long-form journalism. But the National Magazine Awards every year in the U.S., which are the Academy Awards for magazines, in the long-form writing categories, there are almost always 3 or 4 sports stories that are among the finalists. And again, often tangential ones. 5 or 6 years ago, there was a story that was about, on its surface, it was about sumo wrestling. It was about somebody who went to cover sumo wrestling in Japan, but he became fascinated with death cults and just the sort of strange cultural experience that he had going into sumo wrestling. A fascinating piece and very long. It was 30,000, 40,000 words, very, very long.
Let's bring the microphone up here.
One of the advantages of living in Canada is that we're right next door to the elephant, but we also historically were British, and most of us, and so we are influenced by both. And so, like a lot of Canadians, I read a lot of American magazines and British magazines, etc. Right now, to my mind, and I don't think I would know as much as the 4 of you on this, but in reading British football reporting, I think we're in a golden age of beautifully written, poetic, insightful, thoroughly enjoyable pieces. And I'm thinking firstly of Jonathan Liu at the Guardian. But I'm wondering, could each of you say briefly who your favorite contemporary sports writer is from whatever country, so that we could maybe check out that person?
Yeah, Jonathan Liu definitely ranks up there in the United Kingdom, I think. His sports writing, again, might take particular sports matches or situations in a particular sport as the premise, the foundation for the piece, but actually he tends to address much bigger issues, issues around sort of equality, issues around sort of national loyalty and nationalism. Jonathan Liu is sort of writing about those things really. So yes, sport is the kind of canvas, but what he's writing about are far bigger issues. I also think though, there's a lot of intertextuality, there's a lot of kind of piggybacking on other people's sort of shoulders in sports writing. I've found, your style as a sports writer evolves based on the other stuff that you're reading as a sports writer, and also the non-sports content that you're reading as well. There's a writer I've always admired called Chris Hewitt, who was the Independent's rugby correspondent for many years. And for me, I interviewed him recently for a book I'm working on about literary sports journalism. And I said to him, what are your golden principles around writing an engaging long-form piece? And he said, well, always have a joke in it, which isn't where everybody starts from. But he made it his shtick in a way, when he was writing sort of shorter articles as well, to have humour as a strong thread in it. And again, a bit like, I'm not saying he's on the level of Tom Wolfe, but again, for me, Chris Hewitt, when I read his pieces now, and he doesn't write very frequently now, he writes a weekly column in the UK, which you might struggle to get in Canada. But again, you read that opening paragraph and you know it's by him, and it's that distinctiveness which I think is, as I say, a kind of real virtue in great writing, and some sports writers manage to bring that off.
I very much enjoy a German writer called Ronny Reng, who has been translated a few of his books into, and he's very similar to Gay Talese. He also takes kind of the little people and tells stories through them. His latest, well, it's not out yet, but the book that he's working on, for instance, is one game about the 1974 World Cup. It was the only time East Germany played against West Germany, and East Germany won. And he's writing an entire book, and obviously he's, in a way that, and I think, Kevin, as you said just now, it's irrelevant what the score is, because everybody who's going to buy the book knows the score already. East Germany won 1-0, but it's everything that goes around it. For instance, and I'm not saying that because he did it, but he interviewed me, and for that book, and kind of why, because I came from South Africa to watch the World Cup, but then he kind of asked me things about my growing up in South Africa, about parties, about growing up German in South Africa. So he brings all of that thing, which you don't automatically would associate with the game of football, which makes it a really, really exciting, really interesting and good read.
Sorry, Peter, what was his name?
Ronny, R-O-N-N-I-E, Reng, R-E-N-G.
I can go if you don't have an example. I'll recommend one particular book, and it's by somebody who I don't think thinks of himself as a sports writer, named Sam Anderson. He wrote a book published a few years ago called Boomtown, and this book began as an assignment from New York Times Magazine. He was told to go write about the Oklahoma City Thunder, the basketball team in Oklahoma City. And like any good journalist, he read a book about Oklahoma City on the plane because he wanted to make sure he had the context as he was going in. And by the time he had landed, he'd become fascinated with the entire city of Oklahoma City. And if you don't think you are interested in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, I will tell you, you are wrong. This book is a fascinating interweaving of the rise of the Oklahoma City Thunder and what that meant at the time. But also a strange alternative rock band called the Flaming Lips, who were great. The history of race in Oklahoma, race relations, both Native American, black and white. The history of Oklahoma land settlement. It's a fascinating, fascinating book. The other thing I'd quickly put in a pitch for a friend of mine, and pitch may be something double meaning here. He's a soccer writer named Leander Charlotz, and he's American, but you can probably tell from the name Dutch-born, who is currently writing a book about the U.S. men's national team and has a story in Washingtonian magazine right now that's a profile of Wayne Rooney. And he's a very, very good soccer writer. But I do it not so much for his football. I do it not so much for his writing as for his mentorship of our students at Marist College. He helped start an on-campus sports publication, sort of in the style of Greg Lamb, called Centerfield Marist. And he's been mentoring our sports writing students for 5 years now. The publication just hit its 5th anniversary. And I will tell you as a journalism professor at Marist that the best on-campus student writing is for our sports publication. Centerfield Marist, it's a terrific, terrific publication. And it's at Centerfield Marist if you're looking for it. Really great work.
I think, can I just quickly add something? Also, Dave, I think I'm the only one who actually teaches in a sports journalism department. And that's the difficulty, is actually, I teach literary journalism as part of the sports journalism. And when I ask my students how many have read a book in the last year, I'll have maybe 1 or 2 out of the entire class. So it's how do we actually get journalists who are actually interested in literature, because hopefully our students become journalists once they're qualified, but if we don't somehow get them interested in literature, they're not going to be able to write the books and the pieces that we're talking about here. They're going to be writing for Kicker magazine, Match, or Shoot.
Jan, I'm not sure if you wanted to respond to the question as well, or?
No, I feel I'm in very good position. I'm on border, on margin, geographically, thematically. I really, I hope that it's more, but if I'm in voice, I really appreciate the time here because I'm really interested in sport journalism. Okay, I want to introduce myself also like you, that I'm still active handball player. And, and my stepfather was the only coach who won Olympic medal for Poland in 1976 in Montreal. Yes, so I like to, if I'm in voice, I'd like to really thank you guys that you organized this, that you're founding fathers of the panel, because I really, okay, I know that my example is weird, but I like it. I like it very much, and I wanted to show you how wonderful, weird, tricky things. Yes, we are created here in this space, in the center, in the heart of Europe.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes, and we have 2 more people who are waiting to speak. So I'm going to hand the microphone over here, and then I'll bring it over there.
Thanks to all of you for a fascinating panel. I'm going to ask Tom to do kind of a bad thing and to speculate on intent. And my question is, why stock car racing? Of all things that were kind of expanding at the time, right? And I know, Thompson has covered some American football, and Talese has the baseball circuit covered. But why stock cars? Why not any of those, or basketball, or something? And not to leave the witness, but as sort of a corollary there, as you were talking, I was thinking about how much stock car racing as a sport burns an incredible amount of energy in terms of fuel and petroleum products and rubber, and then you've got all the things that go into these giant speedways, and et cetera, right? Today, I guess we'd say that it has a sort of an outsized carbon footprint compared to certain sports. And is that part of the energy that you describe, right? Is there perhaps a dark side to the energy? And I don't know. Again, I'm asking you to speculate on intent here. Why stock cars? Is there, are we in the energy that he's bringing to the sport, right? Is there sort of a kind of a darker side to the energy that he's representing on the page? And I promise that made a lot more sense in my head than I just did here asking the question. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we were speculating about motivations and intentions about why Wolfe or why any journalist might go and cover a particular topic. I think a defining characteristic of many good journalists is obviously curiosity and inquisitiveness, and I think just as Kevin described about how certain kind of sports writers like to kind of go behind the scenes and speak to the unseen people involved in sport, I think and a natural thing for somebody like Wolfe, who's kind of a chronicler of the, he did write the big American novel in a way, didn't he, with Bonfire of the Vanities and another output. You probably, I think there's a sense of him wanting to, through that curiosity, go and sample an experience, all these people descending on a specific spot and trying to capture some sort of essence from that. Tom Wolfe did write, when he was writing around sport, he did do in Esquire's popped up a few times this morning, he did do a profile of Muhammad Ali when he was still known as Cassius Clay, which was, again, I think Wolfe wanting to explore, if stock car racing manifests a certain form of kind of extreme behaviour in a way, Ali was this, Cassius Clay was this kind of sort of showman that a lot of people weren't quite sure. Does he mean this? To what extent is this a persona? And I think again, so really, what I'm saying in a roundabout ways, I suspect that Tom Wolfe, wants to get under the skin of a situation, of a sport, of a nation, of an individual, and he saw opportunities to do that in the subject matter. I suppose that, and that's like the corollary question around the sort of the darker side. I think you know, there's a sort of there's almost a delirium and an excitement in the piece, in the way that he writes about it, and you know, to our modern ears now, as you say, you know, the sport is obviously would have an enormous carbon footprint, a concept which probably, you know, he just wouldn't have bothered thinking about back in the 60s. You know, what's interesting, and again, just connecting, you know, ostensibly it's about stock car racing, but also what's interesting, Junior Johnson honed his driving skills, bootlegging whiskey, you know, around the states there, around the counties, and there's that kind of rebellious kind of element too, that kind of slightly anti-authoritarian element that's woven within it as well, which maybe attracted Wolfe a little bit as well. Yeah, hopefully that answers it a little bit.
Well, isn't it also a window into the American South, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you said he was writing about the American South, and stock car racing is still, I think, something that's very much associated with the South. So that seems like a good handle.
Yeah, and you know, as I said on the slide briefly, I'm an Englishman writing about this, and I may be way off beam on certain things, but that was certainly my interest in kind of thinking about it and what Wolfe wrote.
As an American, that sounds right.
To use an American football idiom, we are fighting the clock here, but I'd like to offer the microphone to the person who's been waiting very patiently. If we can perhaps have a quick question for answer.
I hope this is going to be a quick question. It's really about women in sport. Living in the UK, I am not a sports fan per se, but it was completely impossible to avoid the fact that the women's football team won the Lionesses, and it was just a wonderful, glorious moment. And I am aware that there's a lot more women's sport on television, there's a lot more women's sport in print, and I'm just wondering whether you wanted to comment about this. Is this a blip? Is somebody just doing this to make money, or is it the future?
Yeah, my view is that there's a definite, permanent change, and the pace of change, both in terms of the way that clubs and governing bodies themselves are treating now women's sport with greater respect and importance, and also the way the media are reporting on it, certainly in the UK, is I mean, there's still a way to go, but it's hugely, I mean, it's changed almost beyond sort of recognition in, I'd say, 5 or 6 years, and I think that's reflected in, you know, certainly on the programs we have, you know, at the university where I am. You know, we're certainly trying to sort of help foster that that inclusivity and that change of direction. But of course, I say that sitting up here on a sort of all male panel, talking about sort of guys who've written about sport in the 20th century mainly. Yeah, there's still a long way to go. But I think, you know, things like in the United Kingdom, you know, the Telegraph, quite a traditional conservative agenda newspaper, you know, that's actually driven the way to an extent in appointing a women's sports editor, you know, relatively early on compared to its peers, to support the greater coverage and in-depth, meaningful coverage of women's sport. So I think the parity isn't quite there yet, but it's definitely moving at a pace.
We've got this year, I think we're in the first year, we've got, I think, about 39 students, of which 9 are female. Never before. We've had 2 at the most, and this, we went from 2, in fact last year, the first year it was 1, and now we've got 9 female students. So I think that those things will make a change. You know, and I think, but it is going to be very difficult, because this, like, well, our students just say, well, women's football is not as good as men's football, they wouldn't watch it. And even if we try, which I suppose a lot of people don't even know, that that women's football was banned in England until not all that long ago. You know, so you have to, like we have in South Africa, you have to kind of force your history to change by maybe being a little bit unfair, you know, because you have to overcome this historical imbalance in some way, and I think that's an interesting aspect as well.
Yeah, very quickly, I'd say that Talese, as I said, watched that women's soccer match with the idea of the athletes being a sexual attraction, but gay Talese is in his early 90s. And to sort of build on what Peter was saying, I mentioned Center Field, the Marist student sports publication. 3 of the 5 editors have been women of that publication, and one of the 3 historical directors of our Center for Sports Communication is a woman. So I think it is generational. I think it's changing.
I'd like to have one other thing which is crucially important for me, that not only thank you that you organized this, but literary journalism, abstract. It's very important to have a lot of sports literary journalism, which is not covered, which is not research subject, not something unimportant. So this is one more thank you for you, and I hope will be on the board here in this issue. But Poland situation, I started thinking very shortly. Students, half of students are very interested in Oleg around in sports journalism. Some of them, I don't know how many, are women too. When I think, okay, so maybe I should fix something for book, because it's kind of problematic thing. I think we have a lot of good literary journalism in newspapers, in daily or weekly newspapers. They're engaging they're using literary strategies. It's very interesting. But when I think about books are just, just okay, write a book, okay, about sport, character, of biography, okay, everybody will buy it. So, yes, but only one book, which I think about, it may be named Literary Reportage, is it was edited by Czarne. Edition House is a book about a Polish woman who took Olympic medalist. It was written by also a girl. So I think it's a very interesting situation we have in Poland. So literary journalism is in newspapers, and books are, I don't know what genre, but I don't think it's something common with literature.
Julie, just to add to that, Julie, I was listening to Golf the other day, and they were talking, and I always forget, they were talking, there's 2 twins, Scandinavian twins who are doing quite well in golf. Do you know who they are? No. But anyway, so I think they're from Norway or something. And they were talking about these 2 twins, and they were saying how good the Danish men golf were. And then one of the co-commentators poked in and said, yeah, but don't forget the Danish girls as well. And the Danish girls were actually 6 or 7 years older than the Danish men. And I because I'm one of these people, I then sat down and wrote to the CEO of the European tour, Keith Pelly, who answered me, and I explained to him, these are exactly the things that I'm trying to teach my students that we should not do, because it's it keeps on repeating what we've been having all these years. And he actually answered, and he said he agreed with me, and he said he's going to speak to them. So I think it's these kind of smallish things which are going to bring the necessary changes.
One more sentence. I think it's important that it's for me. My students are interested in literary journalism, but they are not. I've noticed that I'm not interested in quality journalism and quality literary journalism. So I have the same experience as you.
Well, everyone, we went into extra innings, but boy, that was a hell of a game, wasn't it? Let's have a round of applause for our presenters.